welcome to episode 2 of our EXP discussion podcast. Episode 1 was released exclusively for our patrons over on the EXP Patreon. This week I'm joined by Mary-Sue Challinor and Hannah Watts, and we're going to be discussing realistic prop creation for games. Hi guys.
Hello.
And we've got Yaralioglu with me, as always, owner of EXP.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Just what is it you do, and how does that relate to realistic prop creation? Mary, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm a junior prop artist at Ubisoft Reflections, so I'm responsible for creating in-house props alongside any other generalized environment artist tasks. In my spare time, when I actually get the spare time, I like to make props that challenge and further my current skill set.
Awesome. And Hannah, what about you?
Hello, I'm a senior prop artist at Ubisoft Reflections, previously at art lead at Coatsing. I've been at Ubisoft just over a month now. Similarly in my spare time, I just do props for fun, really. Don't play many games anymore, just make tills and coffee machines.
Very nice. Kem?
Don't know what that noise was.
Now that bike's gone. Oh man.
What was the timing?
That's not what I do. What I do is I'm a materialist at Frontier Development, so I'm responsible for authoring all of the PBR materials in the game and building the pipeline for other artists to adhere to. And of course, in the spare time, I run experience points with the rest of the team.
Very nice. Okay, so let's get into it. So realistic props for video games. What is it that you guys would say is kind of the bar of something that is realistic? Where can we say something is realistic as opposed to it just being stylized? Who wants to start us off? Let's go Kem, just to warm us up.
To me, So I think with the realistic props, like if we look at, I think Hannah has a great attention to detail on her, especially on her coffee machines and other assets like that, as well as Mary's oven. It's just capturing the fidelity and like the wear and tear that would actually be in that prop and kind of how old it may be. Whereas on the other end with stylized assets, they tend to focus more on like specific ways of adhering to like a distinct art style. So like Overwatch assets tend to look very different to assets from a Pixar film, for example, and they both look very different to Fortnite assets, where Fortnite might have more curvy, very emphasized shape language, whereas realistic assets really focus on like capturing as much detail as they can.
Okay, cool. So in terms of that detail, some of that I guess comes from adding like wear and tear and weathering. So Mary, with your oven piece that you made, how do you kind of go about capturing that dirty, rusty, old feel of that oven?
So what I did for that one is I was looking online for abandoned props in general, kitchenware props, how rust and dirt reacts with specific materials. So in that case, it was like a powdered metal, like a coated powdered metal material. And I also found some like scrapyard pictures online. So just like, when people are throwing out all their old kitchen items. So I found lots of good reference on how it works there. But like in terms of like, so there was a different material on there on the back. That was quite difficult to find because the pictures that I had for that specific prop, they weren't there. So I sort of had to go by how it would react to in real life and what kind of environment it would be. So it would be in a kitchen, it could be damp, it could rust or like mold in certain ways. So it's just sort of like going deep into the research of like, going back to how the material reacts with wear and tear and time. So in that case, it was like aluminium.
Okay, so that kind of research and planning, What's sort of your process for approaching that?
For me, I go straight to eBay. That's the first place I go for reference. It's
I
like
wasn't
you could,
expecting that.
yeah, you could find so many pictures. I mean, I know a lot of them can be taken on like really crappy iPhone 4s or whatever. It's like you get all the angles sometimes. So that's a really good place to find stuff. So that's my first port of call. But a lot on YouTube videos too. That's just sort of like my research process there. Just getting as much as I can from every angle as I can, different materials, close-ups, and that sort of thing.
Okay, interesting. So the reason you're using eBay and YouTube videos is because they're more likely to have multiple angles of the same asset?
Yeah, so I mean, with the YouTube videos as well, it's not just like how it looks; it's how it functions, and it helps you create like storytelling on these props too. So, like for example, if you're texturing like a hero piano, if you watch how a pianist would play on the instrument, you would see that they would use like the rightmost pedal the most. So that would be like the most worn pedal of the three. So that gives you a really good opportunity for storytelling, like how much is it being used, if it's being used, and stuff like that. So it's just like gathering all those kinds of different things at once onto your pure ref scene. It's like you've got everything that you want to make right from the very beginning before you even block it out.
I guess the other good thing to say about eBay and Gumtree and other classified ad sites like that is a lot of sellers have to declare damage if they're selling an item. So you'll quite often get close-up photos of said damage, which makes it incredibly easy to like build up a library of how you're gonna, as Mary was saying, add that wear in a convincing manner. It's not something people would photograph for fun, like a corner of a dented table or something. So that's why ad listings are a really great resource for it.
I never would have gone to eBay for like reference, to be honest. So that's kind of an eye opener. Do you actually buy any of these things by chance?
It's very hard not to.
I've thought about it, but I feel like if I popped that cork, then I'd end up with a hoarder's house of just all sorts of stuff. But I go to a lot of kind of antique sellers, mostly like just for fun because I kind of like the design of all the stuff. But I'll like inspect their hoarders piles rather than bringing it in
and not build your own.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask, do you go to? Well, I guess you go to auction houses, but I guess you can capture as much reference as you want there, and like antique shops and things.
As long as the owner's okay with it. I've caused a fuss sometimes, and I haven't asked permission first. I've tried to get a sneaky photo in. So yeah, always ask permission.
Noted. Fair enough.
Okay, so you were mentioning storytelling. So I'm going to throw this one over to Hannah, but how have you kind of integrated storytelling in your props? Because you've got a range of props that are on your ArtStation that I think show some great little stories. So how have you kind of approached that?
I guess the most recent one, the gas meter that I did for the flipped normals tutorial. So as we were just saying, I got a lot of reference from people that had ripped them out of old tenants' houses. And they were there from like the 50s and they just got ripped out and left. So obviously like they've been exposed to the elements. They've been there for maybe like 5, 10, 30, 40, 50 years. So they'll have likely been painted around. So you'll get like specks of paint. So, maybe when they got ripped out, they got, dragged along the floor because they were just scrap. And also the stickers as well. Like I like to do like little stickers and decals on my props. I think it's a very self-explanatory way of adding story. Obviously, like the stickers on the gas meter, for example, are very specific to it's like got gas warnings and like don't something like turn off gas before uninstalling and stuff like that. I just think that adds the character that you need for something to stand out.
Okay. Is that something you make yourself, or is it something you find images of, or how do you kind of create those decals?
I make them myself in Photoshop. So I've actually done a lot of logo design and graphic design in the past. I did a lot of CodeSync's games logos and UI, which not a lot of people know that. I do like stylized stuff and graphic design and stuff as well, and that actually helps feed into things like this because it means I'm not having to rely on finding vectors online or pulling things out of photographs and trying to repurpose stuff like that. So I just make them myself.
How do you why a coin operated gas meter at first? Because it's not the first prop I would consider making if I was creating a prop, for example. Like the coffee things make sense and it's obviously something I enjoy, so I guess that's why I would go for coffee. But what was why the coin operated gas meter?
So obviously I had to pick something that I could do a full length tutorial on that would cover all stages of the process. So it needed to be somewhat complex. And honestly, I spent the rabbit holes I went down on the internet trying to find what prop to do because I didn't have a plan in mind. And I honestly, I remember spending half a day on a website from the 80s or the 90s or something for antique calculators, just clicking through these ancient hyperlinks. And nothing was singing to me. And then I actually found a photo of one on the Wikipedia of my hometown. It was a kind of forum thing, and it was basically loads of people telling stories about how the gas man would come round and empty their coin-operated gas meters, and just different stories about how they cheat them. And I'd never heard of them. I don't know if you guys remember the little paper strips of the 90s that you could top the electricity up and stuff, but I'd never heard of coin-operated things in terms of utilities. And I was just fascinated. And then I was just looking through the photos. I thought they're such a boring object, in terms of function, but in terms of what they look like, they're really quite interesting. The silhouette of them, they're quite odd. This strange shaped thing, and obviously there's different stickers and the wear on them, and all the knobs and buttons, and I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, they look very retro for the most part. But there's one thing that you and Mary capture incredibly well in your props, and it's the aged effect with rust and dust and the sort of damages. Because I have the prop up now, and just even the corners have this great chipped effect. And I'll be honest, I have no idea how you've done that, and I've been trying to figure it out for the most part since you've released it.
On the gas meter.
Yeah. So do you have any tricks, or there must be a technique that you guys use?
There's a couple of smart materials that people have made that can simulate different effects like that. So chipped paint or bubbles in a surface.
Yeah, that's the way that I learn how to do things like that. Is I'll go on ArtStation and buy a bunch of smart materials and just try and reproduce it, and that way you can learn how to do it really. And that's just my method.
So do you make your own smart materials?
Yeah, I have a library of my own that I use for everything, for work and stuff like that. But that they were just driven, through other people's how they've done it, and then I go through and I replicate and think, maybe there's a faster, cheaper way of doing this, rather than having 3 different expensive layers.
Okay, so you've kind of talked a little bit about how you go about sourcing and creating these props. But if someone wanted to become a prop artist themselves, how might they go about doing that? Have you got any advice, or what they can do, or how they can kind of go about building a portfolio and creating these realistic game props? Let's go to Hannah.
I spoke a little bit about this in Kieran's article that came out this week.
Yesterday. Very good.
Yeah. And I always find that's a bit of a tricky one because you're not just making props all day. There's a lot of other things that are under that are expected of you, as Mary mentioned before, in the job, and I think you have to demonstrate those in an interview or in your portfolio as well. So definitely having a portfolio of high quality props that, hit that realism goal and that fidelity is important. But, you also have to be able to, work well with budget, both time and kind of geometry and texture resolutions. You have to work within constraints. You have to work well as a team. You have to understand like the bigger picture, like where the prop is going to fit in the game and in context, and how often the player is going to see it, and know where to spend resources. And because I didn't start my job like as a prop artist, I just started my career as like a 3D generalist, and I've kind of done bits and bobs on different projects, and that has ultimately fed into my position now. But it's there's the reason that I am in like a senior position is because I've got that extensive background in other things, like project management and giving feedback and dealing with clients, and there's the other things that play into being a professional prop artist that don't necessarily get talked about outside of just having a really nice portfolio on ArtStation. So it's a big topic, I think.
Okay, Mary, have you got any advice?
Yeah, one of my old leads at Sumo, he said, one of the best ways to get into environment art as a whole in the beginning, as you're a graduate, is to create one really realistic prop to show that the process, how it works, the general PBR pipeline. One tileable material, because chances are, even if you are a prop artist, like Hannah said, you're going to be doing other things. You're going to be using tileable materials for props, face weighted normals, that sort of thing. And also an environment, because, maybe at some point you might end up set dressing. You want to know as well, it's important to know how your prop is going to fit into the world when you're making these big games, because you could make a prop and somebody could go in and place it completely upside down or something, and you're focusing on one area of it. So it's good to show that you have knowledge of all those areas for sure.
Okay. So, Kem, I'm going to throw this over to you. So we just had materials mentioned there. With tileable materials, you being a materials artist, how do you go around kind of, if you're making a prop, how would you approach creating materials for that?
So if I was making a prop, it might differ from Hannah and Mary's approach, but they could probably confirm. But I would find the reference that I would need, and then probably chart off what kind of materials that product actually has on it. So if we take, I don't know, like a monitor stand, for example, you've got the metal stand, so that might be some aluminium, and then you've got the black plastics. So I'd make a generic plastic as well, and then anything in between that monitor might have. So like instantly I know I might need 3 tileable materials, and it mainly comes down to unwrapping the asset correctly so that you don't get the grain going across the plastic, for example, going in the wrong direction. So it's more UV work for the artist, but I think long term it allows a lot more flexibility to just swap things in and out, as opposed to baking a specific asset and getting the old school workflow.
That's actually a really good point you made about the grain, because it is sometimes something I see on new artist assets that's a real I guess a real flag is the grain going, things going in the wrong direction.
The biggest culprit is like wood and stuff, because wood grains go from point A to point B, and if it's going horizontally and then on a vertical beam it's still going horizontally, that makes no sense. So that's an instant flag that person they don't really care too much about the attention to detail, and that could probably ruin their chances at landing that job. So
it appears a little bit slapped on, especially if you've got intersections or the wood's been chopped. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I don't think my approach to props would get the quality that Hannah and Mary get, because I'm going to assume they're both uniquely unwrapped and baked and textured and everything.
Not everything. You don't have the luxury of that in any studio. Production is constant battle with time and resources. So yes, a lot of it is making the decision, as I mentioned before, like where to spend resources. But I mean resources in terms of time and man months, I guess you'd call them. And if you've got a lot of things that are going to be in the background or in shadow, or they're just minor props, then as Mary mentioned, you'd probably rely more on face weighted normals, or just no shading at all, and just tying textures on them.
You briefly touched upon just working on how to get a job or how to stand out as a prop artist, like the wood grain, for example. But in the article, you mentioned personal projects as well, and I'm just curious, how important that is, especially for artists that are trying to land a job or get their foot in the door.
From being in a position, so at CodeSync, I did help out with hiring, and so I would look at a lot of portfolios, and I think it's quite important to have personal projects, but try and have things that are a little bit unique. Like if we get applicants that are, they've all done the same AK-47 tutorial, it just gets a bit like, oh, it's great that you're doing tutorials, but there's no personality there, and people need artists that can respond to briefs and be creative, because I think that's a kind of a quality that's not always, it's kind of just expected but not often discussed, is being creative and responding to a project's needs or a change in direction. So yeah, definitely I think doing personal projects that are unique to you, and also you're going to be the most motivated about something that you're interested in if you've got a real so like from the greasy spoon that I'm endlessly doing but have never actually touched for the last couple of months, that's very personal to me, because I'm from the north of England, which is, I'm from Liverpool, so it's the number one go-to place for greasy spoons on a hangover.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think definitely knowing you, you are, you love coffee, so you can definitely see that your passion shows through with your work. I think it helps. Not that I'm passionate about ovens or anything, but
probably it's just jerry cans.
I love jerry cans. Yeah.
There's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I want to actually ask about. So you mentioned about showing tutorials in a portfolio, and there's a couple of different things like that I've seen discussed online of are these things you should or shouldn't do? So there is tutorials used in your portfolio. They're showing your wireframes and your UVs and your texture breakdowns. I've heard opinions of some people saying these things are fine. Some people saying it just invites criticism, or if you've done, if you see 10 people doing that AK-47 tutorial, some of them are going to be better than others. So are you just inviting that comparison? What's kind of your thoughts on those things? Is it good to include that kind of stuff, or is there some things that you should not use, or are there ways that you can kind of work around that? What's the view?
For me, I don't like to put anything on my portfolio that I've learned from, purely because I find it better to learn from something by doing it first, but then doing, using those skills on my own thing. And then that is sort of what I would put on my portfolio, because I just feel a bit better in myself that it's just completely my work, if you know what I mean. But in terms of tutorials, if you're on the other side of it, for the article that I did for experience points with the oven, if you have stuff like that demonstrate that you know how to do something, that really helped me in my hiring process for Ubisoft. They really enjoyed that article, and I believe that is one of the reasons that they sort of saw me, because it showed that I knew how to make a really good prop. and the process behind it.
Okay, so that process that you were able to show that, you think that's one of the things that really influenced that decision?
As well as like the actual prop itself. But yeah, it's like showing that you have the knowledge. It's like going back to the discussion earlier. It's like if you have a material on there as well as your prop and an environment or something like that, or even just some things from like a stylized project, it shows you're adaptable and you can do more than just props, because chances are you're not just going to be doing the props further down the line too.
Okay, interesting. So with the kind of breakdowns, I guess that's something, like I was saying, with the wireframes and the textures is kind of part of showing that breakdown. So I'm going to ask this one to you, Hannah. Do you think that it's important when, like in your past where you've looked at applicants' kind of portfolios, do you look out for those things? Is that something that you positively want to see, or is it something that sometimes can trip people up?
I would say for junior positions, it helps, but I would maybe recommend for more informal breakdowns to make use of blogs rather than having it on like your ArtStation portfolio. But for more like intermediate or senior positions, it becomes a little bit more about, for me personally, about the artistic eye. And you can sort of tell from someone's portfolio, especially if there's enough on it, whether they've got good practices or not. Obviously, to a point, like portfolios can be deceiving. But yeah, I think if someone, maybe has like a slightly weaker portfolio from an artistic point of view, but demonstrates good processes and talks about their thoughts, that can help make up for that. But yeah, I would think about, don't just shove stuff on there, because I've seen like people just like shove texture maps and not present it nicely, and I think that can be a detriment, because I don't know, texture maps aren't meant to be pretty. Unless they're hand painted, then maybe. But...
Hey, leave my texture maps alone, Hannah.
I've actually not seen yours. That was definitely not a dig, but.
Oh, I'm even more offended now that you haven't seen it. I actually want to ask, because you both work at CodeSync and you both do like realistic props in your personal time. Like, are there any like difficulties between the two, or like similarities in kind of how you approach them? How comes you approach one in personal work? Is there a reason why you do one more than the other in your personal time, for example? Because I know tons of people always struggle with what sort of art style that they should pursue, be it stylized or realistic, and they tend to just try a bit of everything.
Mary might be a good one for this, because you came from realistic to stylized to then realistic again, so you probably felt the transition.
I think it's best to basically shape your portfolio to the job that you want ultimately, like the end goal. And for me, I prefer to work with realistic projects, larger projects. So that definitely helps drive me there. And I think, going back to the passion again, like with the coffee machines, it's like, you like coffee a lot, so you're making that environment. If you like realistic stuff or, stylized stuff like you do, Kem, you're going to want to pursue that. And I think it definitely shows through your work. So
what happens when, let's say, that passion, because we all experience burnout, or we all get a bit tired of working on that, the coffee shop that Hannah's working on. How do you kind of overcome those sort of things? Like, do you have any remedies to bring that passion back when you're working on these year-long projects?
I've never really been on a project where I've lost passion. I think all development has its ups and downs, and there will always be a point in every project where you've just got to get through that last bit at the 11th hour. And I think, I don't know, it's a difficult one. Sometimes I take a break from my personal stuff. I think that's why the coffee the Greasy Spoon's just taken forever is because I keep either saying yes to other things or, finding a new prop I want to model that's more exciting than, having to go and recheck my UV2s in Unreal. And then in terms of work, I guess just remembering that it is a job at the end of the day and you just have to get it done, even if you are, if maybe morale is low or something. It's still a job like any other.
Yeah, I have a huge problem of saying yes to everything as well, which is why most of my personal projects have just never been finished. I need to learn to say no to some things.
Yeah, I'm hyper conscious that I need, because I started this project, the Unreal one, maybe last year, I think, because I'd identified that I don't have a full. So I've done a lot of scenes through working at CodeSync. I've done I would spend all day in editor, but they're not on my ArtStation because they're stylized. So I was hyper conscious I didn't have a realistic demonstration of me working in engines. And I still don't, because I keep saying yes to tutorials or freelance work. But yeah, maybe not. Maybe now I'll actually finish it soon.
Good luck.
Interesting that you were mentioning about kind of getting that motivation to finish. I don't know if you saw the blog from Jonjo this week with the graveyard, his work graveyard of things that he's been working on but dropped, and he just put up the blog post, and that kind of prompted some other people to put up similar things with kind of posts of all the projects that they started and never finished. Is that something that you have as well? I think most kind
I
of...
hadn't seen that actually, but I really like
it's really good.
that idea.
Yeah, it's very good. I love his. I think he did a polycount thread for one of the environments. I don't know if that was in the graveyard or part of it was in the graveyard, but I found myself refreshing that every couple of days, has he posted something? And then I saw it on the graveyard, and I was just so sad.
Some of the work is better than my work, and it's not even finished.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know if I want to look at it then, because that would be good. That's a really cool idea, though, because I guess it prompts people to go digging through files they might have forgotten, and maybe they'll pick something up again. I've seen a lot of discourse on Twitter actually about if a personal project is feeling like a slog, then it's maybe just cut your losses and start another one. Obviously not with everything, because then you'll never have anything for your portfolio. But I think that's something that happens as you grow as an artist, is knowing when to call something done, or knowing when it's not going to be done, or maybe you've just gone too much down a rabbit hole and it's not working out, and maybe you just need to move on to a new project and take what you've learned and apply those lessons from failures to the next thing.
It's quite funny because we've actually discussed this while we were at CodeSync together, and we ended up coming up with the conclusion that basically you take a break from doing art by doing different art.
All the time.
Yeah.
Every night.
Sometimes if I'm I don't know what to do with myself, I'll maybe do a bit of yoga, and then I'm I still don't know. So I'll then, if I don't want to do 3D, then maybe I'll go and paint on my iPad or something. It's and I think it's funny to talk about, but I do wonder if, that's maybe something of a problem of our generation, that we feel we always have to be making, especially with social media. It's do we always have to be putting out art? I know I certainly feel it sometimes.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I feel if even just sitting down to watch Netflix, I feel guilty. I'm oh my God, I need to be doing something. I have 5 projects that I could be working on. This isn't right. So it's kind of a problem in the current generation, I think.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, I can't remember if I spoke about this on Alex's podcast or not, but when I used to do my aerial dancing, and I used to be on Instagram all the time, and my whole feed would just be all these people doing amazing tricks and being look, my splits are so much flatter and all this. And yeah, I'd be sat on the sofa, and I might have trained for 3 hours the night before, but I felt rubbish because I was just seeing, and you forget that that person might be their first post in like 2 weeks or a month, but because you're seeing everyone post all at once, you feel like everyone in the world is, constantly on top of things and progressing, and any downtime that you take is like a detriment to you. Thankfully, I don't really go on Instagram anymore, but it can feel like that if you're in a lot of Discords, or as great as they are, and like if you're on ArtStation as well, like sometimes that constant onslaught of people making you stuff can guilt you a little bit.
I used to have that actually with Daniel Figure. Obviously, he's the substance god, but like I would see his materials every other day and think, like, I'm doing something wrong. Like I'm doing something's not right. I need to be working 10 hours, 12 hours a day. But it's just important to know that, everyone works at different speeds. That person has 10, 15 years ahead of us. So I think a lot of people struggle to remember that. And there's nothing wrong with like taking it at your own pace.
Totally. I think it's important for your mental health as well. Like, you can't create art if you're really tired and fed up.
I've tried.
Oh, sorry, go on, Kim.
No, go Mary.
A way that I found to sort of get around that, even just like a little bit, is when you're feeling really shit and you're looking online and you're thinking, oh, I should be doing that, and you're feeling guilty, is to just lower your expectations. Maybe even if you just go on your phone and just say, right, I'm just going to spend 10 minutes and I'm just going to look for some more reference, just something else that I could use for when I am feeling motivated to do that stuff. And I do that sometimes, and I feel like instantly better that I've at least done just something, even though I'm just watching Netflix at the same time.
Keeping your head in the game, isn't it, I suppose? Like, without having to actively expend your efforts.
Yeah, I think it's kind of 3D is a long game, really, isn't it? I think that's something a lot of students or beginners fall foul of, seeing these ArtStation posts of people like Tor Frick, or, they've got millions of pieces that are phenomenal, and they kind of don't have that patience to realize that it takes time to build that up, and it takes dedication to the craft of kind of refining. Because you see people with phenomenal work. I mean, everyone here's got great work, but there's loads of pieces that you don't have online that aren't up to the standard of the stuff you have. And I think that's kind of the wall that perhaps people trying to get in aren't necessarily seeing. They're not seeing those 20 other props that you made before you made that really good one.
They're also not seeing like the trials and tribulations of making props. Like the something I started the weekend was like a Russian tea maker, and it's quite curvy and has all these like weird shapes in it. And I was having an absolute mare trying to get those curves in and to not have weird shading efforts. And I had to like leave my desk and go and play Animal Crossing for half an hour because I was getting so annoyed that I couldn't get the smoothing right. But yeah, you don't broadcast those feelings and stresses on social media. Like, not if you're trying to maintain like a professional facade, I guess. But yeah, like every asset that I pick up, I'm like, can I make this? Like, I always self-doubt myself.
So how does that translate? So you do your kind of personal projects like that, but with kind of freelance work, for example, the work you guys have done for Decagon, how does that kind of translate? If you've got to make a really good prop for that within kind of a time limit, I guess you've got different set of challenges to kind of a personal project where you can just kind of take a break. So how do you kind of approach that?
Because I think everyone sees these Decagon props online and they all look insane. Like, every single one of them has this quality bar that just seems like beyond the level that most artists can achieve. And
I guess it's important to make a distinction that so a lot of the stuff that dropped recently, and not all of it, but a lot of it was collab stuff, which is the asset packs, and that had a really flexible deadline time. Obviously, I don't know how much we can talk about it. I don't know like what's NDA and not, but that felt more like personal work than the contract work that we've done for them, which is more like, we need this by the end of the week. And with the outsourcing stuff, you're not on like a timesheet or anything like you would be at a studio. So, you can go over on the hours, but you're not going to get paid for them. So if you're working full time as a freelancer, like there's no incentive of going over the hours. Obviously, if it's on the side, it's at the artist's discretion. But it's generally encouraged that you don't, because it obviously builds up different expectations of what can be done in 3-4 hours.
I had this talk with Alex actually at the Dynasty meetup, and this is when I was first starting contract art, and I was saying to him how completely different it is to the collab art, and he said basically that not every prop is a hero prop, and all the collab stuff are hero props, but like Hannah said, you are time boxed, and at the end of the day, it's a deadline and you should meet it. It's like when I'm at work, I don't find it quite difficult. I don't find it difficult to concentrate when I'm at work, but when I'm at home and I'm working on my personal stuff, I find myself that that I'm distracted more often. So I didn't really have much of a problem when it came to contract work, because in my head I was getting paid for it and it's just the same as going to work. But like I said, with the personal stuff, it feels completely different.
Okay, so do you think part of that is like a feedback structure, but with your personal projects, you don't kind of have the same person to turn to, like you might have your lead at work, who you can, if you get stuck on something, you can go to them and they might help you get back on track? Is that kind of one of those things, you think?
I suppose, but in a sense, like for me, I tend to be motivated by deadlines, and I should probably set deadlines for my personal work. But I know that they're not set in stone, so I can be a little bit cheeky and be like, "Oh no, I'm just gonna go and watch Netflix or something like that." But it's just something in my brain. It just completely separates it from personal work, and I know that I have to do it. So it's not necessarily like the leads or anything like that. It's just the deadline itself, for me personally, anyway.
Okay, so that kind of external expectation is something that helps motivate you to get it done. What about you, Hannah?
Oh, I'm the same. I can't fire myself, but if I didn't do my work at work, I would not have a job. So, I think it's a similar thing to like going to the gym as well. Like sometimes you just have to get into that routine, but then it's really easy to fall off the routine as well. Like I'd say that with the lockdown that's going on at the moment, I've definitely hit a kind of creative plateau where I'm not creating as much personal work and taking an active interest as I was maybe like 3-4 months ago. And I'm hoping that when things go back to normal a little bit, that will kind of my routine will come back into place. But I don't know, maybe it'll be like the gym, maybe I'll just not go back.
Interesting. So mentioning the lockdown, that's probably a good time. So with the lockdown in place, a lot of game dev has moved to working remote as opposed to in-house in the studio. So you've had a bit of experience now of working remote in that capacity, and obviously you've got your in-house experience at CodeSync. So how have you kind of found the challenge or the change of moving from being in-house and working in a team to kind of working remote?
I miss people. Really, I didn't think I would, because and Mary can attest to this, I was so, I'm such a grumpy person and I hate noise. And I was always whinging about the programmers behind us being really noisy. And I thought that, working from home, I was like, it's awful what's happening, but I was like, it's going to be so nice just to be in my own space. And it was nice for about 2 weeks. And now I'm just like, I'm so ready for it to be done. I think just so when you're around like a bunch of artists, obviously depending on the studio culture, like you can have those organic chats, and if you do run into a problem, you can just kind of tap someone on the shoulder and be like, could you just show us this, or how did you do that? When you're working remotely, it feels more of a formal thing, like you have to type out a big message, and it feels a little bit more like you're bothering people, or you're making a big deal about you just can't find a checkbox in the editor. So I'd say that's definitely different, and having to onboard remotely as well has been interesting. It's gone surprisingly well, but it's something I won't forget for a while. Starting a new job from my home in a quarantine.
Okay, interesting. And Mary, what about you?
I left just a little bit before Hannah did, so I had a couple of weeks in the new job. But yeah, it's 1 minute. My thoughts just literally gone.
I could hear them escaping from me.
Yeah, I was like, they're leaving her.
I don't know what I was thinking about. Yeah.
But I actually do have a question, I guess. Like, there must be pros to working from home, especially for, I guess, because Hannah started her job working from home as well. So they can't all be doom and gloom.
Not commuting is just fantastic. Like, I was saying on Twitter the other night, this is the first time since I'm like 18, 19, that I'm getting 8 hours of sleep a night. I think I would feel the effects of that more if I wasn't so lethargic from being in the house all the time. But I baked, right, for the first time in 6 years because I have so much free time. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. I'll bake a cake. There's bananas that are going off. And yeah, those are definitely pros that I think, you've probably seen it in the news, like a lot of people are wanting to hang on to a lot of the pros. And I think wanting the option to work from home more. Like, I know when I was leading at CodeSync, obviously it was super, super stressful, and there's a lot going on under the hood, and people need you all the time. And there were definitely some days where I really wish I could have just, maybe one day a week just worked from home, to still be productive, but just to decompress a little bit. I think that's discussions that should definitely carry forward after this.
So do you think game companies will, like, the best option is to have, like, you can work from home sometimes, but you have to be in house, I don't know, 3 days a week at least to...
Oh, totally. Like, so many web dev companies, I've got a lot of friends, because I did computer arts at uni, and a lot of friends who went on to work in web dev and the UI rather than games. And it's really common in that industry to have, maybe people who need to come to the office like twice a week or sometimes once a fortnight.
I don't think I could do it because I like to talk a lot. And when I'm at home, I have nobody to talk to other than my cats. And it's a bit difficult.
Discord, that's what Discord is for, and group chats.
It's not the same.
But it's not the same.
I know. But hey,
even voice calls, obviously they're a totally fine substitute for not having meetings in work, but I do find voice calls are a little bit more like, I sometimes struggle to get into the flow if I know I've got a voice call coming up. It just feels a little bit more inorganic, I guess. Obviously there's the awkwardness of like, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, all the technical issues that randomly pop up. But my camera's not working right now, sorry.
My mic's muted.
Okay, cool. So let's wind back round to the kind of realistic props, because that's what we started talking about, and we're kind of coming close to the end of our time. So we'll kind of finish off by, let's have your kind of number one biggest secret tip of how to add that kind of extra level of realism to a prop. How about Hannah starts off?
Okay, I have one that's slightly, it's not really a secret tip, but it's something that I found works for me. So I am a big advocate for like traditional art feeding into 3D and just art fundamentals in general. And I don't so much anymore, but I'd say a few years ago I did a lot of still life observation paintings. And I think doing something like that, like this, real fundamental art skills, even if the painting's shit, it's training your eye to look for those details and to work out how surfaces work under different lighting conditions. And I took an online course with Schoolism, which taught painting with light and shadows, I think it was called. And I think I still attribute that background to why I can pick out details now, because your eye's just a muscle. So, well, your eye and your brain, I guess. But it's all training the same muscle groups to work together.
Okay, so traditional art as a tool for kind of learning better observation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, have you got a secret tip for us?
For creating a realistic prop?
Yeah.
I suppose mine would be more technical. I repeat this in my head all the time when I'm making them. Basically, is to not try to overuse like procedural tools alone, because most of the detail and the realism comes from the stuff that you control yourself. So try to paint as much as you can by yourself without using like smart masks and things. Even if you just add in like paint layers by over the top, just to fine tune everything. Don't just slap a smart material on and something like that and just call it done. And mostly for me as well is just like selling the material first. So in my opinion, like, you can sell your material most of all just by controlling the roughness, getting the right value for the material that you're making. So to create a strong base before you go in and do all the tiny little details. If that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's very good. And I'm going to pivot it slightly to ask Kem, what's a secret tip for a realistic material?
For realistic material, I wasn't expecting a question, to be honest. Attention to details, the first thing, and I want to say textile density, but not in the traditional sense. But if your asset's meant to be used on, like, let's say the table's 4 meters, you need to make sure that all of the small details actually make sense and are the correct size. Like, you wouldn't have any cracks or things that are the size of an entire door. Like, they'd be much smaller. And you want to capture as much as you can the hand place elements that Mary was talking about. Even though it's super difficult procedurally, there's still ways to kind of get you most of the way there. And then most of the work's done, and it's just a case of taking that to Painter and adding those final touches that Mary and Hannah constantly reference to.
Brilliant. So I think we had some great tips there. Thank you guys for joining me, and thank you again for joining me here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for joining us.
Wraps up episode 2 of the EXP podcast. Please check out the EXP website. Ken, what's the URL?
exp-points.com.
Brilliant. And head over to the Patreon, see if there's something there for you. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.